when I went to Newcastle, which was in 1969, I started off in a hotel bedroom in one of the hotels in Newcastle because the PTE was not formally set up when I arrived. The job that I had as the new Director General was to take over 3 bus companies, Sunderland, South Shields and Newcastle, to enter operating and financial agreements with the other providers, the then National Bus Company and British Railways, and produce a policy statement and a plan for the future. At the same time, predating me, Tyne and Wear authorities, under the chairmanship, as it happened, of Lord Matthew Ridley, who was then the chairman of Northumberland County Council, no relation, had employed Alan M. Voorhees, who subsequently became Martin and Voorhees, and Colin Buchanan and Partners to produce a land use transportation study. They recommended that there should be a new investment in public transport. And Brian Martin, who became the Martin of Martin and Voorhees and at that stage had taken over as managing director of Alan M. Voorhees, because he was a personal friend, when he and some of his colleagues came up from London to review where the project had got to present to the authorities the following week, came back on Saturday afternoon at about 5:30. I gave him a whiskey, sat him down and said, right, what are you going to recommend? And he said, well, we've decided that what the central issue should be is to modernise the rail system and take the clapped out North Tyne Loop, because British Railways were running really grotty old diesels. Take the clapped out North Tyne Loop, take the South Shields line, use the geography of the area to tunnel under Newcastle and Sunderland and a bridge over the Tyne, because without that geography it wouldn't work. Well, I listened to this gobsmacked and I said, it's crazy. You'll never get away with that. I really did say that. At the same time, the then chief engineer of Newcastle City Council, who was the chairman of the technical committee, didn't give a damn about what the public transport element of the plan was, as long as all of his motorways, which were then part of a massive plan, and as you know, only one had ever been built. As long as these motorways went in, anything could go in as far as public transport was concerned. The irony, of course, is that not another 12 inches of motorway was ever built, and the Tyne and Wear Metro was built. At any rate, we did all the analysis, and the thing that we achieved rather magnificently, we actually took the whole scheme from a line on a map to digging the first tunnels in a 3-year period, which I don't know what the history is before us, but you couldn't do that today. The whole process is very, very much longer. And David Howard was the director of planning, and he had a very small team who worked magnificently and put together the whole plan with the help of the consultants now called Mott MacDonald. They were Mott, Hay and Anderson in those days, and a firm of electrical and mechanical consultants. With the North Tyne Loop, the link to South Shields, but nothing at that stage to Sunderland. We were going for what we thought we could manage to do. And I spearheaded the obtaining of the finance and the parliamentary bill. In those days, the financial arrangements were such that for a scheme like a new rail system, tram system or whatever, was funded if you got funding, you got 75% of the cost was given by the government and 25% of the cost was paid by the local authorities. Now, there is also the question of why did we go for the technology we went for. The original concept was a tram, albeit on major new infrastructure, in tunnels and bridge across the Tyne. And we were looking for a name for this thing because we did not want it to seem like a train. Light rail had not become a fashionable term in those days, so we called it Supertram. And that was the thing when I was on television and in the press. It was all Supertram for Newcastle, for Tyneside. Well, for Tyneside, it wasn't Tyne and Wear. And remember, Sunderland was my hometown, and it wasn't going to Sunderland. There's another story about Sunderland which I'll tell you about. Well, that's how it all came about. And what I should say is, because we went so quickly with putting the whole scheme together, getting the money and getting the parliamentary powers, we were ahead of Manchester. We got the money, and then, as happens always, financial crisis, no more money for major new schemes, and Manchester had to wait another 20 years. We got a slug of money because it was the first new urban railway in Britain, other than extensions of London Underground, for years and years and years. Once people had seen us do it, a lot of cities thought we'd like some of that, and all of a sudden, even if there was money, the government had more schemes to look at than they could cope with. When we went for our money, we were the only project. It was Newcastle or nothing. The government knew that Manchester was coming behind, but they'd not actually submitted their proposals. Now, the other thing that happened was our relations with British Railways, including friends of mine, because clearly the British Railways people, who had been providing this clapped-out diesel service for years and years, didn't take the Tyne and Wear transportation study seriously. And they also didn't take seriously the small band of schoolboys who, as they saw us, who were developing this system. And they sort of did nothing about it. Gradually, they began to notice that we were taking things seriously and were putting forward a serious project. So they started to put forward the British Railways alternative to it, of how they would modernise the whole scheme. Well, things came to a head when John Peyton, the then Tory minister, came up to visit Newcastle. We'd already been working with the economists, the senior civil servants. We had lobbies of Tory and Labour people from the northeast all pressing this scheme down in Parliament. So that was all moving ahead. But the minister had never visited Newcastle. And Peyton, who came from Somerset, opposite end of the country, came and he was asked whether he was going to approve our scheme by the press, because he met the press after he'd met the authority and we'd been for a bit of a tour around. he gave a guarded response, but it was not a negative by any means. At any rate, eventually, shortly after the visit, it was announced on a Friday, I think it was, that we were going to get the money, so the scheme was going ahead. And the British Railways people had their proposal ready to put on the desk of their chairman on the Monday morning, and they were too late.
Too late, yeah, it's about a weekend.
Now, I'm not saying their scheme would have gone ahead, but it was ironic that we picked the thing up, ran with it, got it before people noticed. Well, there was Tony Ridley, there was David Howard, John Baggs, Simon Coventry, young lads. It was a very small team we had. Andy Cunningham, first chairman, an absolute character, splendid chairman. I know he got into trouble, but he was a bloody good chairman, because he appointed me, of course. And he never said this, but essentially his message was, now look, Sonny, I'll take care of the politics, you get on with the professional side. And he gave us enormous latitude as long as what we did was efficient and convincing. And he took care of the politics, because you remember, I went from a research job at the age of 35 into this prominent position. And I would have been chewed up and spat out by the political process without a very strong chairman. Bill Collins was very influential. Bill was the leader of Gateshead Council. And he was very keen on various transport policies. He had a lot to do with the zero fares for pensioners and that sort of thing. Arthur Gray was a character at the time, but he was not in a position of power. He was part of the authority, and he'd been a very tough and powerful Tory, but it had to be Andy. Had to be Andy. And I don't think, because Andy got into trouble later, I don't think Andy ever got the credit he deserved, the political credit that he deserved. And remember, he came from County Durham, and therefore people were suspicious of him on those grounds. I trust they weren't suspicious of me because I came from Sunderland. There's always been battles between Wearside and Tyneside. And the Wearsiders were not particularly sympathetic to the power of the Passenger Transport Authority. As part of our project, we developed a test track for the new rolling stock. And we intended to use a disused piece of British Railways track running through part of Sunderland. And I went with David Howard and others to a public meeting at what was then Sunderland Tech, now Sunderland University, not on the site that it is today, to make this proposal and consult the public. Well, they yelled at us for 2.5 hours non-stop. And the next morning, David and I said, forget it, we'll go to Long Benton. The other thing we did was to make sure that our analysis included a totally integrated system. And the sums were very much better if we took into account the supporting bus network, with the bus network reorganized to support the metro, with some of the routes that were paralleling the system being used as feeder services. And that's why we said it was the best integrated transport system in the United Kingdom, because it was designed that way. And that helped to commend it to the economists and the civil servants with whom we were negotiating when we were developing the scheme. There was general spirit of support in the North East, because I mean, my view of politicians, it's a long time ago, but my view of politicians then was that although they used to fight like cats and dogs, if it was getting something out of London or getting one over on London, they were the Geordie politicians were absolutely united. Didn't matter which party they came from. It's the North East versus London. In London, remember that the whole thing had been started by Barbara Castle. The Tories had taken over, but the spirit of let's do something in the urban areas, the whole ethos of setting up the passenger transport authorities and executive was very strong. And the other thing you've got to remember, people in the North East like to have something to be proud about. And I won't say every citizen was on side, but a lot of people thought, wow, here's what we can do.